Hello everyone, welcome to this webinar, Sustainable Procurement in the Educational Sector, and we are looking at IT in specific, of course. For the next 30 minutes, we will learn more about how to work with sustainable IT in the educational sector, and we will also have the opportunity to listen in on an interview with an IT director from the UK. He will answer questions about challenges and give examples on learnings. And you will, of course, have the possibility to ask him questions after the interview as well. So, my name is Dennis Wad. I am the Global PR Manager at TCO Development, the organization behind the IT Sustainability Certification TCO Certified. I will be your host today, and we are broadcasting live from our headquarters in Stockholm, Sweden, where we have a really cold winter day today, actually. With me, I have my colleague Claire Hobby. Claire is the Global Director Purchasing Engagement at TCO Development. Claire, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Hi, thanks, Dennis. Yep, sure. So I work with our purchase engagement work at TCO Development, and there's a team of 7 of us based in various parts of the world. And our mission is to help organizations of various kinds who are wanting to put sustainability into practice in their IT purchasing and management, to help them understand sustainability, understand TCO certified, and hopefully make good use of it.
Thanks, Claire. And with us today, we also have Chris Clark, who is the Director of IT and Data at the Criminal Academies Trust, TCAT. We were actually not sure Chris was going to make it today, so we have pre-recorded the interview we did last week, but we are very glad he could make it today. Chris, welcome. And why don't you start with telling us a bit about yourself as well?
Yeah, hi Dennis. Thank you very much, and it's great to be here. So yeah, I'm Director of IT and Data at the Criminal Academies Trust, and we're a trust made up of 45 schools across the southeast of England. We have 15 secondary schools and 30 primary schools. My role is to look at the day-to-day maintenance, hardware renewals, security and data protection across all of those 45 schools.
Thanks, Chris. And Claire, maybe you can start the webinar with giving a short general introduction to why the public sector, and in this case, the educational sector, is so important for driving sustainability.
Yes. Yeah, sure. You know, and I mean, a lot of education is public sector, a lot of it is private sector as well. But what we've seen is the public sector is really that part of a lot of the countries we're dealing in where there are sustainability mandates. There are mandates on sustainable procurement as well. So a lot of this work has really started in the public sector. If we extend that to the education sector, I mean, here we've got a really great cross-curriculum priority of sustainability, both in the classroom, but also in the management of the facilities and you know, extending through to procurement, buildings and the like. And I mean, on some level, we have a very large responsibility and captive audience in students, right? We have to make sure that the students are equipped with the knowledge and the ability to be good stewards of the planet we're giving over to them very soon. So I think we're seeing a lot of trends in the educational space on obviously climate concerns. There's obviously some very tight budgetary concerns when it comes to the education sector as well. So I think it's really interesting for us to dive into what that means in practice. You know, how can you drive sustainability and sustainable procurement when your budget may be tight? And I think that's a really interesting conversation for us to have as well.
Okay, great. So let us have a look at the pre-recorded interview we did with Chris. And after the interview, Claire and Chris will be available to answer questions live. So please take the opportunity to write questions now in the chat while listening in on it. The full interview will, as always, be available on our website shortly afterward. And everyone that signed up for this webinar will receive an email about this as well. All right, so let us listen in to the chat Chris and Claire had last week.
How are you approaching the hardware category today, from procurement through to managing the device inventory, and how does sustainability play into that?
Well, firstly, sustainability has kind of been a key drive for what I've done since being in the role. I think there's two sides to that sort of question. First of all, the managing of what we've got, the legacy devices and legacy hardware, and what we do to make that more sustainable. And then obviously the procurement of the new hardware and the new contracts that we take on board. So from managing the legacy side, we look at making sure we can extend the life where possible. So we put together a benchmark for each device category about how long we expect to use it for, what would this typical lifespan be. And then instead of at the end of life, we start to take that out of the picture as an entirety. We start to review those. So we may review the servers, we may review the Chromebooks or laptops, and see if we can extend the life where we can to keep them going and keep them in use as long as possible. There's obviously an element of work there, but with a clear asset register, we can target that and manage that as a project in its own right. I think from the procurement side of things, it's probably might be my key driver so far, and that's because the procurement has really the power to make a bigger and bolder change in the sustainability side, to really get the equipment in and the hardware in from a point of view that can be more sustainable. But equally, the resellers that we work with, I also look at those as well from a procurement point of view. So lots of work has gone around procurement, namely the looking at essentials, so the essential criteria, so some benchmark around pass or failing on some standardised, let's say, for example, they have to be TCO certified Chromebooks or new devices, and if they're not, then they may fail the first stage. We can then also add other layers of desirable in, where we can then to push the boundaries a little bit more, where we can do weightings around that. And then we always typically have a sort of a social values driver, where there's a specific question with weightings, where that can be customised depending on what we're procuring.
Yeah, that's great to really put an emphasis on procurement. And end of life is always on the mind of IT using organisations. And you mentioned that you look, rather than end of life, you look at extending the life, which we know is a really important aspect of driving a more circular approach to IT. What does that extending life look like at TCAT?
Yeah, so I think so namely as I sort of mentioned before about kind of keeping them going as long as possible on the in use in schools. What we've obviously started doing though is looking at longer term contracts and creating partners that we build a relationship with. I think that's really key. We've moved away as a trust. We've moved away from doing individual projects or procurement projects where we take on we need so many devices and we procure them and we get those devices and then we go again and we procure another sector. What we've actually done is create all of our contracts are long-term contracts, so sort of 3, 4, 5 years long. And what that allows us to do is work with the partners and build that conversation, that dialogue over a period of time, and really create a strategy around that end of life. Part of those contracts that we've got in place are around end of life strategy. So we have a company that we work with, and it's not a disposal company, it's an end of life strategy company in many ways. So it's flipping on its head. So when we have devices that we really feel are end of life, then it will be shipped to them, and then they help us review and audit those and come up with a package in terms of what can we do next. Is there any chance we can get them back into the market in any other form? Is there anything else we can do in terms of community good use, so we support the community around our schools? And equally, if they are really end of life, then the important thing for me is around having trackable disposal. So not just disposing and shipping them off to another country and they could just damage the environment out there, is actually how are our devices disposed of and dismantled and used for parts, and how is it being used, and can you track them? So doing a lot more of that at the moment. So it's sort of a new area we're focusing on.
Fantastic. So thinking about what you mentioned, partners are really important. I would imagine one of those first partners would be your vendor, your hardware vendors and suppliers. How do you kind of start that conversation on sustainability with them? How do you send a signal to them that this is going to be an important part of your category approach?
Yeah, 100%. Our partners that we work with are absolutely crucial to supporting us drive this. From the very first stage, again, it comes back to procurement really. We do quite a rigorous process at TCAT, or the Chemical Academies Trust, where we do soft market testing in advance. But previous to that though, we do also look at start to engage. So my role is really looking at the next 2 to 3 years. So I'll start to engage with different companies just find out what's on the market, do a little bit of research. That will lead into a more formalised soft market testing, which is where we really start to test the market and pin the research down to how far can I push sustainability whilst maintaining an element of competition. And I think as I've gone over the years, I've got braver and bolder in terms of pushing the resellers and the original equipment manufacturers a little bit harder each time to challenge the sustainability approach, away from sometimes the element of greenwashing area where you can get a lot of information, a lot of data, but it's really hard to compare one to the other. And quite often you can almost just recycle that for different companies. So it's really hard to unpick that. And I think the external accreditations for me have really helped me drive that and start a dialogue and a conversation with partners around what it is we're after. And by just testing the water on that, by putting those out there and seeing how that goes and what the competition is and making sure we can still have a range to compare through the procurement process, it really enables us to create a much harder and drive a much better sustainable approach to that. And I think in many ways, I think actually a lot of it comes down to, I suppose, my passion in those conversations. If I start the conversation straight away, quite often people get the idea that I'm perhaps not messing around when it comes to sustainability. And then they start to get the picture of that is definitely something that as a company they need to be hitting those points as a procurement and showing a lot more depth to what they would do rather than just kind of perhaps some of the recycled marketing campaigns that they perhaps have a company. They really need to pin down what it is they're providing, how's that meeting some of our sustainable criteria. But also, as I said before, it's also the resellers. So I kind of pin the reseller down to what are you doing in your social values aside from the hardware and software that you're going to be providing to us? Because it's just as important that if they're not passionate as a company, they're not going to be as passionate about the hardware that they're providing. So it's really a three-way thing. I want the manufacturers to be passionate about sustainability and can take the challenge that myself as a client can give. And I want the resellers to do the same. And I want them to engage with me in a three-way dialogue, really, a four-way dialogue with people like yourselves in the accreditation sector.
So you are clearly a champion of sustainability. Thinking internally in TCAT, from finance to other departments in your organisation, how do you go about finding fellow champions or at least getting buy-in for the sustainability ambitions you have? So often we find that sustainability or sustainable procurement is a team of one person, but you have to work with others in the organisation to really drive through some of these goals. How does that look for you at TCAT?
Yes, it's a really interesting point. I think I was talking about this week in terms of the private sector. They can have teams and really drive this as a really powerful message and really sort of drive the company because that's what they're appointed to do. And in education, quite often it's reliant on ourselves, where mine's obviously IT, but I've got a passion for sustainability, and it may be the head of estates, again, sort of driving sustainability through there, and not always having all the, I suppose, the skill set or understanding in the wide range of areas that come under sustainability. So I think probably more often, if we talk about it enough, I'm going to find somebody that's going to be passionate as well, and then that's it. Then I've latched onto them, so they're on board, and we'll keep the conversations going. But I think really just that drip feed of information. So being passionate myself and almost measuring what are we doing. So we started small, and then we got bigger and bigger, and we drove that a lot harder. And we talked about, we challenge companies a lot more now. So just drip feeding that through to leaders and the executive team to show what we're doing and what can be done. That then sort of working with the procurement team. I think the procurement team then sort of learn from different challenges from different procurements that they do, and I learn from them from other sectors, from estates or health and safety or some of the educational supplies. And likewise, some things I'll learn from IT, then they'll take into their procurement. So we all kind of challenge each other and kind of keep that driving force going. And that's underpinned by a sustainability policy in the trust, which we're very passionate about. And in that covers all sectors of education, from the buildings to the hardware to the supplies and the workforce. So yeah, there's a wide range of elements there, but it's really just the dialogue, keeping the conversation going and keep challenging some of the conversations, challenge the policy as well, regardless of whether it's to do with that sector, just raising that point and keep the conversation going to not be complacent, I think.
Great point. You mentioned measurement briefly. What are the key metrics you find useful?
It's an interesting area, actually. It's something I'm going to be doing more of. In many ways, I've, I suppose, refrained from metrics to drive the sustainability strategy for me in IT, partly because I felt getting my ducks in a row around driving such as TCO accredited or even TCO certified, or even sort of the SDIA, so Sustainable Digital Infrastructure Alliance for software, which we're moving into. Driving those first by design will lead to a more sustainable outcome. So I focus on doing that first and foremost, with then the thought that once we've got those in place and we've got much more of an inventory from hardware and software, which is more sustainable, then I can get some benchmark measurements that then I can start challenge. Because at the beginning, it's much more about large gains quite quickly through some of those procurement strategies, as well as some of our benchmark and extending life strategies. Whereas from the second point is then it's much harder to make the smaller gains when you're starting to refine those smaller sustainability strategies. And it's much harder to take certain areas, maybe about maybe recycled plastics, for example, in the hardware, where it's not quite as cut and dry about essential or desirable. You've got to really look at how am I going to put that in procurement? And that's perhaps where we can start to look at measurements to measure those smaller gains over time.
Great point. So, Chris, it wouldn't be a sustainability conversation without talking a little bit about climate. So do you, is climate on the radar at TCAT? I'm thinking even amongst staff, students, is climate something that you look at more specifically when it comes to the IT space, measuring carbon footprint, for example? Is that something that is priority?
Yeah, absolutely. It's something as a trust we measure, and obviously with the by nature of the buildings, education, there's challenges there in terms of making it more sustainable. But our sustainability policy is looking at all aspects of how we can improve sustainability. And yes, from my role, I focus on the IT side of that. And if we all focus on areas and come together, then obviously as a trust we're driving the sustainability practice. From obviously the carbon footprint measurement there. Again, that's sort of one of those areas where I'm starting to measure that, measuring some of our legacy inventory and hardware compared to where we are now. So the changes between our newly procured hardware, which is much more sustainable, that should show a massive difference. And then obviously measuring that over time to show the smaller gains and the smaller tweaks and changes that we can make over the next few years. But equally, within that, there is a much bigger picture, and I think you touched upon there the students. And involving the students, for me, in many ways, from an educational background, I've seen many initiatives around sustainability in schools. And sometimes it's driven by somebody who's passionate in schools, and we do various things and it works. And then it kind of drifts off. And actually what I wanted to do and what I recognised was sometimes as an organisation, we're not always being a role model for those sustainable practices. And we're getting groups and clubs together, with students pulling together who are always passionate. And it's very much on their agenda nowadays, much more than it was before. So they will want to drive it, but we haven't got the depth and breadth of the adults and the role models to drive that as well. So for me, by driving it and being role models in the organisation, the next stage to that is bringing the pupils into and students to say, actually, what else can we do next? We've got this already. Here's a really solid platform that we can work from. What is it that we can do next? And bring their all amazing ideas in, because at the moment, with a clear strategy, it's got legs and it will keep going, and there's longevity to it, and it can only get better.
Student engagement is a really interesting trend across the world. We're seeing in the education space. It's always interesting to get an understanding of how to harness that and how to bring them into the planning and the picture as a whole. So finally, Chris, TCAT has multiple campuses. Your purview is quite expansive in that regard. What would be your advice for keeping everyone connected on the sustainability mission and really reaching out across multiple sites, multiple use cases and teams to keep them on track with sustainability, keep them up to date, and to keep things moving forward?
I think, firstly, sort of the key driver for me through all of this is having a clear strategy. So from an organisation at a kind of top level, having a clear strategy and clear direction, Obviously, that then feeds into people responsible for procuring and the people sort of decision makers around that equipment. And much of that now is driven much more centrally in our trust, and that allows us to really standardise and drive that sustainability practice, as with other areas that we can drive on behalf of the schools. But then from that, it is about kind of reaching out and sharing that message about what are we doing, why are we making those decisions, and involving them through consultation as well. So they've been involved in that conversation throughout, and then equally bringing them in afterwards, as with the students, to see what we're doing, and tapping into those staff and students to see what we can do more. But it just comes to kind of almost marketing what we're doing internally as much as sort of marketing externally. So yeah, it's quite powerful really to get the amount of, for our trust, we've got a lot of staff and students, we've got about 23,000 students and around 3,500 staff. So within there is real pockets of passion, and within schools there's always that pockets of passion that want to be engaged in this. And I think where we touched upon the students, it's not always around whether students also can improve our organisation in its own right. It's also the fact that the students will be the ones shaping the world in the future, and I think that's what we need to tap into, is actually they're the ones that are going to be doing this bigger and better than we are now. So how can we engage them and inspire them into a new world that it's only going to get bigger over time, as we're ultimately taking away from the environment, and we need to put back in and make sure we do everything to mitigate and minimise that where we can.
Yeah, it's a great point. So before we leave today, Chris, for listeners today that might be in a similar setting as yourself, challenged with sustainability and IT, what are some parting thoughts that you'd like to share?
Oh, wow. So I think for me, if there's one message through conversation on this, I think I always come back to procurement. I think procurement is the driver for me in terms of shaping and challenging the resellers and the manufacturers to ensure that there's pressure on them to be more sustainable and deliver more sustainable products. If they can deliver something that's less sustainable and people take that up, then that's what they're going to put, that's what they're going to make, and that's what they're going to supply. But it's responsibility of all of us in terms of the clients and the people purchasing to engage with yourselves as TCO certified, to engage with the B Corps, to engage with this the Sustainable Digital Infrastructure Alliance, and all those different areas to really support that drive and say, actually, this is important to us, and this is what we do in our procurement. Say, actually, if it's not meeting this criteria, then you're not going to get through that stage. And if it's not meeting this criteria, then obviously that may be scored lower and get a lower rating for you, so a low weighting. So in many ways, I think it hinges on really clear procurement, which has led to and will lead to that longer term relationship with contractors rather than just doing ad hoc contracts as you go. And that relationship piece between the reseller, the manufacturer, and yourselves and us as clients, I think has been the most powerful point in driving sustainability forward.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Claire. Seems like you had plenty to talk about last week there. And I just want to mention once again that the interview will be available on demand on our webpage later, and you will get an email about that. So let's see, we have got some questions here in the chat that we will try to answer. And Chris, you are the expert here, so the questions are all for you. And I got the first question here. Can you perhaps tell us a bit more about your inventory management as of today?
Yeah, sure. In the video and the questions, I kind of talk generally in procurement, but there are some specifics, I suppose, I can add to, which may give people some ideas or a flavour. So for us, we have, for example, all of our servers that we purchase now are TCO certified, and that was part of our procurement essential criteria. So if they weren't TCO certified, then though that catalogue or that tender wasn't taken any further. Equally, with our laptops and Chromebooks, 98% of those are now, the new purchases are TCO certified. Again, that's off the back of that being the essential criteria. Within the desirable criteria for the laptops and Chromebooks, we put in areas, things like the rugged, so rugged military grade, again, to make sure we get the competitive part of the procurement, which is essential. But also looking around kind of we talked about the recycled plastics in there, so that could be desirable. So we still keep the doors open, see what comes through, and equally the modularity. So the repairability, off back of some of your webinars you've done in the past about the repairability index, having the option to companies to put forward a catalogue which allows for greater repair to keep it in use for longer. So that was quite key. For the desktops, we were quite bold more recently with our new procurement, and we opted to go with a specific procurement framework that was purely around refurbished devices. So our desktops, about 90 to 95% of our new desktop purchases are refurbished only, and that does the job for what we need in education. We also have about 80 to 90%, so within that we also built in our monitors. So 80 to 90% of our new purchases and monitors are refurbished as well. So again, obviously, yes, you've got the TCO certified for new devices, but actually taking refurbished is a much more sustainable approach that we felt at that time. And obviously there's lots of data around the age and keeping it in use, but actually overall, we're not manufacturing new equipment, and therefore the impact is much less. So from our strategic point of view. We also then we've been sort of extended out into sort of the software market. So after listening to a podcast and hearing about how you can be more sustainable in the coding sector, that kind of sparked into looking in and talking to CTO Certified, which led into the SDIA, and really kind of understand a little bit more around that. So we've taken on, we've taken on a few new pieces of software, namely our student management system in schools, which is used by everybody. And we put out there as part of the social values criteria around linking and working with us and SDIA around the benchmark and calculators to make their coding more sustainable, as well as the data centers that they store in the cloud. So obviously where we move from servers that we can control whether they're sustainable on site, as we move into data centers, what happens there is actually how we quality assuring that the data centers are sustainable as well. So that whole sort of dialogue has come up. But that three-way conversation and getting that buy-in as part of the procurement, say, yes, as a reseller, we are willing to work with you and SDIA, has been quite powerful. So that's quite a new concept. So I'm really excited to see what comes out of all those areas. And then from the social value side, we've also kind of alluded to and brought in more of the B Corp as well. So we've got one reseller which is B Corp already, and we've got 3 other resellers that are in the process of applying or in the application stages of B Corp. Again, and there are other forms out there, but there are a few sort of benchmark ones which it's worth mentioning. So our current inventory and our current assets as we purchase are much more sustainable now just because of those. And again, we know it's been externally accredited, which is good for us.
Thanks. We have another question here. It's great to hear your approach on TCAT and the approach of driving forward sustainable approaches. I wanted to understand if TCAT has considered technology subscription models for the tech requirements. Can you say a few words about that, Chris?
So in terms of the technology subscription models?
Yes, product as a service, maybe software as a service, etc.
Oh yes, so I think I touched upon that previously around so our MIS is quite a large software as a service solution. So yeah, obviously we move more away from the installs locally hosted on the cloud, on the on-premise servers, moving into the cloud. So yes, really looking at how the sustainability around that software as a service is really crucial. So yes, as I said, the data centers, how are they sustainable? What are they doing to show that? It's kind of a hidden feature for us now. We just think it's in the cloud, but it's sitting somewhere on somebody else's server. So holding them to account more on that is quite crucial. And I think the really a new area for me around that is working with SDIA, about the coding of that software. What does that look like? What's our minimum standard? What's our benchmark at the moment? And how can we make it better? And I don't know what the answer is to that at the moment, but I'm quite excited to work with the companies around what comes out of that.
Great, thanks. And we have another question as well. Can you please tell us a bit more about how you work together with your reseller?
Yeah, sure. So, lots of conversations in lots of different areas, namely a few points. Currently, we've got a catalogue for our laptops and servers and our devices. We tried to get them sort of repairable as well, so that modular approach for replacements of batteries or keyboards or screens. And we're working with one of our resellers at the moment, and also the manufacturer, around training our technicians to be able to make on-site repairs, both in warranty, or namely in warranty, but equally if they can do it in warranty, then they can do it out of warranty. So as long as we can get spares from our supplier, then our technicians are trained within we've got 5 regions across the trust, and within those 5 regions, the technicians can be trained to make those and make those changes and repairs on site. So not only does it extend the life of our devices because they are repairable, it also prevents and reduces that shipment of devices around the trust, around the country. For what we would have typically done when it was in warranty, we would have had to ship them out and get them back. And when you're doing the odd device here and there, that's not very sustainable. So that's quite an interesting area. We've also started looking at really challenging the concepts around what we're being purchased with. So if all of our devices now, which they are, come with USB-C cables, do we need to get another USB-C cable when we replace those? Can we opt not to have those in the box? And can we opt to, is there a choice around what materials those cables are made from? So all of those conversations we're starting to have, and that's quite new. Again, where that goes, I don't know, but just having those challenging questions, because of our partners are all on board and understand the importance of sustainability, nothing's off the table. We just throw it out there and we have a conversation and see where that goes. And equally, I touched on in the interview around the end of life strategy. So the key one is there, taking all of our devices, reviewing those with our partner and seeing what we can do to extend the life. And if it can't be, where are those products going to, how have they been disposed of?
Great. We actually get a lot of questions here. Well, let's see, we're running out of time almost. We're going to have a few more questions. Just a simple one, I guess, Chris. How long have you been working actively with sustainability at TCAT?
So I've been, actually my background is education. So for 20 years, I was a teacher and leader in primary and secondary schools. And I came into this role 3 years ago. So during those 3 years, being quite passionate about sustainability in my personal life, I've realised that actually this was a really good platform to make a bigger change and a bigger difference in sustainability. And that's when I started to look into all the different options and internationally, not just in the UK, because especially working with TCO certified, where you work across the world a lot more, it was a real eye opener to see how much of the language and the concepts that we have in the UK are actually UK based, and some of this almost the greenwashing elements of that in terms of the language is used as a marketing campaign as opposed to an actual sustainable driver. So having those bigger, wider conversations with people worldwide really opened my eyes to what else is out there and how should we in the UK be actually a lot more like other international countries and doing a lot more than that, rather than just looking past looking within the marketing campaigns in this country. So 3 years is the answer to the question.
Yes. So one last question here. What will be your top advice on how to be successful with sustainability in the educational sector?
Oh, top advice. So, I mean, at the end of the interview, I did sort of say about getting the procurement right. I think within that, and outside of that, the reality is there is no right at the moment in sustainability. By nature of technology, we're ultimately damaging the environment. So it's about mitigating, minimising. So really, how are we, having the conversations? Who are we talking to? How are we looking at what we do in our practice currently to just challenge the boundaries? And for me, I would say start with something small. If you feel you're not doing a lot, just take one thing, put that into a procurement, or make that small tweak, and then make another tweak next time. And bit by bit, those incremental changes will build into something a lot bigger. And for me, I felt like I wasn't doing a lot at all at the beginning, and now sort of a year, 2, 3 years in, it feels like we've got quite a more robust strategy and a lot more to show for it. And that just started with a very small change. So try and change the world straight away. Just start small.
Once again, thanks, Chris. And Claire, do you have anything you want to add last minute here?
Oh, I know. I love the idea of starting small and don't reinvent the wheel. Learn from your peers, find your friends. There's tools available for everyone to use. So start small, but do something.
Absolutely.
And thank you, Chris, for sharing so much of your deep knowledge on this topic today. Really, really useful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, Thanks, Claire, and thanks, Chris. So the webinar will be available as usual on demand via our website. There you will also find more information about our work and also find contact info if you want to ask more questions. You will also find the contact details on the screen shortly. So thank you everyone for listening in. Our next webinar will be in January actually, and you will have more information on our website shortly. So thank you very much and goodbye until next time. Thanks.
Thank you.